The locker room fell silent as Captain Harris slammed Easton's badge onto the wooden bench, the metallic clink echoing off the tiled walls like a final verdict. "You're weak, Easton." A gay cop who freezes up during a domestic call and starts talking feelings instead of taking control. This department doesn't need that kind of softness. Easton stood frozen in his blue uniform, the fabric suddenly feeling like chains around his chest, his heart hammering so hard he could barely breathe. At 29, he had poured 6 years of his life into the Chicago Police Department, chasing down leads, backing up partners in shootouts, and earning citations for bravery that now seemed meaningless. The call that morning had been routine on paper, husband waving a gun at his wife in a rundown apartment on the South Side. But when Easton arrived, he saw the fear in the man's eyes, the same fear he had carried since realizing he was different, and instead of drawing his weapon, he had talked the guy down, saving everyone without a single shot fired. To Captain Harris and the dozen officers now staring at him, that was weakness. Whispers had already started after a rookie accidentally glimpsed a text from Wyatt on Easton's phone during roll call last week. "Too soft," someone muttered behind him now. Easton grabbed his jacket without a word, pushed through the door into the humid Chicago evening, and drove north toward the small apartment he shared in secret with the one person who made the world make sense. Wyatt was waiting at the kitchen table, plates of pasta steaming under the soft overhead light, his dark hair still damp from a shower after a long day as a social worker at the youth shelter. "Rough shift?" Wyatt asked, standing to pull Easton into a hug that smelled like fresh soap and safety. Easton buried his face in Wyatt's shoulder for a long moment, the tension in his muscles slowly unwinding. "They know, or at least they think they do. Harris just called me out in front of everyone." Wyatt stepped back, his brown eyes searching Easton's face with that steady calm that had first drawn Easton to him 2 years ago at a community fundraiser. They had met when Easton volunteered to speak to at-risk teens about staying out of gangs. Wyatt had been running the event, and their conversation over bad coffee had stretched into hours. "Then maybe it's time we stop pretending," Wyatt said quietly, but Easton shook his head, the old fear rising like bile. His parents back in the quiet suburbs still sent birthday cards addressed to "our straight son who'll settle down someday." And losing the job that defined him would shatter everything he had built to prove he belonged. That night, they ate in silence broken only by the distant wail of sirens, and when Easton finally fell asleep beside Wyatt, his dreams were filled with locker room stairs and the sound of his own badge hitting the floor. The next morning the whispers followed him into briefing, and even his longtime partner, Mike, avoided eye contact while handing over the patrol car keys. "Just keep your head down, man," Mike muttered, but Easton could see the doubt there too. By midday a new call came in. A missing 16-year-old boy last seen near a known cruising spot in Lincoln Park. Something in the report tugged at Easton, the kid's photo showing the same scared confusion he remembered from his own teens. He volunteered without thinking, and as he drove toward the park with the radio crackling, he wondered how long he could keep hiding the man who made him whole. The investigation led him to a shelter where Wyatt worked, and their paths crossed professionally for the first time in public. Wyatt handed over a folder of leads without a flicker of recognition in front of the other officers, but later that evening back home the tension boiled over. "You treated me like a stranger today," Wyatt said, voice tight. "I get it, Easton, but it hurts." Easton reached for him, the argument dissolving into quiet promises whispered in the dark, yet the crack in their world had already formed. Days blurred into a pattern of careful distance at work and stolen moments at home, but the pressure was building like a storm over Lake Michigan. Easton's mother called that Friday, her voice bright on speakerphone while he cooked dinner. "Any nice girls in your life yet, honey? Your father keeps asking." He lied smoothly, the words tasting like ash, and when he hung up Wyatt just watched him from the doorway, the unspoken question hanging between them. The following week brought another domestic call, this one ending in an arrest, and Easton handled it by the book, but Captain Harris still pulled him aside afterward. "See, you can do it when you try. But that softness is still there, son. Fix it or find another line of work." The words burned, and that night Easton sat on the fire escape with Wyatt, sharing a single beer and watching the city lights flicker. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," he admitted, and Wyatt squeezed his hand. the city humming around them like a promise and a threat all at once. The missing teen case deepened, leading Easton to late-night stakeouts and interviews that forced him to confront pieces of himself he had buried long ago. Each clue brought him closer to the boy, but also closer to the moment when his two worlds would collide in ways he could never prepare for. As the stakeouts stretched into the second week, Easton found himself parked in an unmarked car near the lakefront at 2 in the morning, the radio low and his thoughts louder than the distant traffic. The missing boy, Tyler, had left a note hinting at family rejection over his sexuality, and every interview Easton conducted echoed his own unspoken fears. Wyatt had started leaving the shelter earlier to meet him after shifts, bringing coffee and quiet support, but the secrecy was wearing thin. One night, Wyatt slid into the passenger seat unannounced, his presence both comfort and risk. "You can't keep doing this alone," he said, handing over a thermos. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that reminded Easton why he had fallen so hard for this man who saw straight through every wall he built. Back at the apartment the next morning, Easton received a text from Mike. "Captain's watching you extra close. Watch your back." The warning sat heavy as Easton headed to the station for roll call, where the usual banter felt laced with something sharper. During lunch break in the crowded cafeteria, one of the older sergeants leaned over. "Heard you've been spending time at that shelter. Got a soft spot for those kids, huh?" The implication hung in the air, and Easton forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to him. That afternoon, the case broke open when a tip led him to an abandoned warehouse on the west side. Tyler was there, scared but alive, huddled with a small group of runaways. Easton coordinated the rescue with calm efficiency, talking the kids out without force, and for a moment the captain's earlier criticism felt distant. Tyler's mother arrived at the station later, tears streaming as she hugged her son, and she turned to Easton with gratitude that made his chest tighten. "You saved him when no one else would listen," she said. But the victory was short-lived. Back in the locker room that evening, Mike pulled him aside, his face troubled. "Look, Easton, some of the guys are talking. They think your situation is affecting the team. I told them to knock it off, but you know how it is." Easton nodded, the betrayal stinging even from his closest friend on the force. That night at home, Wyatt sensed the shift immediately. "Talk to me," he urged, and Easton poured out the details, the words tumbling faster than he intended. Wyatt listened, then cupped Easton's face gently. "You're not weak for caring. That's what makes you good at this." Yet doubt crept in, and when Easton's parents announced a surprise visit the following weekend, the pressure multiplied. He spent the next days cleaning the apartment, hiding any trace of Wyatt's belongings, and rehearsing lies that made him feel smaller with each repetition. The visit started innocently enough, his mother chattering about neighborhood gossip while his father grilled him about promotions. But over dinner the questions turned pointed. "Still no special someone?" his mother asked, and Easton felt Wyatt's absence like a physical ache across the table. Later, alone with his father on the balcony, the older man clapped him on the shoulder. "A man needs a family to fight for, son. Don't let this job make you forget that." Easton bit back the truth, the words burning in his throat, and when his parents finally left he collapsed onto the couch beside Wyatt, who had waited in a nearby coffee shop for hours. "I hate this," Easton whispered, and Wyatt pulled him close, their embrace a silent rebellion against the world outside. The following Monday brought new tension at work when a routine traffic stop escalated into a foot chase through alleyways. Easton caught the suspect, a young man running from a warrant, and during booking the kid muttered something about "cops like you pretending to be tough." The words lingered, feeding the growing rumor mill. Mike confronted him in the parking lot after shift. "People are saying things, Easton. If you don't shut it down, it could cost you more than just respect." The conversation ended in awkward silence, and Easton drove home wondering how many more cracks his life could take before it shattered. Wyatt met him at the door with takeout and a movie queued up, but even the familiar ritual felt fragile. They fell asleep tangled together, yet Easton's dreams were filled with locker room laughter and the sound of his father's disappointed sigh. The next day, a department memo circulated about mandatory sensitivity training, and Easton wondered if it was aimed at him. During the session, the instructor spoke about bias and inclusion, but the sidelong glances from colleagues made the room feels suffocating. Afterward, one of the female officers pulled him aside in the hallway. "For what it's worth, I think you're brave," she said quietly, the first kind word in days. It should have lifted him, but instead it highlighted how isolated he had become. That evening, Wyatt suggested they take a walk along the lake to clear their heads, and under the fading sunset they talked about the future they both wanted but couldn't yet claim openly. "One day we'll walk hand in hand without looking over our shoulders," Wyatt promised, and Easton wanted to believe it more than anything. But the case files on his desk the next morning reminded him that belief alone wouldn't protect them. Tyler's follow-up interview revealed more about the underground network of rejected youth, and Easton found himself volunteering for extra shifts to help. Each success chipped away at the weak label, yet the personal cost mounted. When Mike finally admitted during a late-night stakeout that he had overheard the captain planning a performance review focused on team fit, Easton felt the ground shift beneath him. The drive home was quiet, and when he walked through the apartment door, Wyatt was waiting with open arms and the simple question that changed everything. What if we stopped hiding? Easton didn't answer right away, but the seed was planted, growing alongside the fear and the hope that maybe, just maybe, strength wasn't about silence after all. The performance review loomed like a storm cloud, and Easton spent the following days burying himself in paperwork and extra patrols to prove his value. Captain Harris watched him with narrowed eyes during briefings, and the once easy camaraderie with the squad had curdled into polite distance. Even the coffee runs felt loaded, conversations dying the moment he approached the break room. Wyatt noticed the change immediately, the late nights and distracted silences stretching between them like an invisible wall. One evening after a particularly grueling shift, Easton came home to find Wyatt sitting on the couch with 2 plane tickets in his hand. "A weekend away, just us," Wyatt said, hope lighting his face. "No department, no family expectations, just breathing." Easton wanted to say yes, but the review was scheduled for Monday, and the thought of leaving Chicago felt like running. "I can't," he replied, and the disappointment in Wyatt's eyes cut deeper than any captain's words. The argument that followed was quiet but raw, accusations of shame and fear spilling out until they both retreated to opposite sides of the bed, the space between them colder than the autumn air outside. The next morning, Easton woke to an empty apartment and a note from Wyatt saying he needed space to think. Panic clawed at his chest as he drove to the station, the empty passenger seat a glaring reminder of what he risked losing. During the review, Captain Harris didn't hold back. "Your instincts are solid, Easton, but this department runs on trust and toughness. If your personal life is distracting the team, we have a problem." Easton defended himself with facts and closed cases, but the captain's final remark lingered. "Prove me wrong, or find somewhere that fits your style." The words echoed as he left the office, shoulders heavy, and when he called Wyatt, the phone went straight to voicemail. That night, Easton sat alone in the apartment, scrolling through old photos of them laughing at a Cubs game, their secret weekends in Michigan, the quiet mornings when the world felt possible. The loneliness hit harder than any patrol danger. Mike showed up unannounced with a six-pack, his usual easy grin replaced by concern. "I hate seeing you like this, man. The guys are splitting into camps, some defending you, others saying you're a liability. I told them to back off, but it's getting ugly." They drank in silence until Mike finally asked the question Easton had dreaded. "Is it worth it? Hiding everything?" Easton didn't have an answer, and when Mike left, the emptiness returned tenfold. The next day brought a breakthrough in a cold case that had stalled for months, and Easton threw himself into the interrogation with a focus that surprised even him. The suspect cracked, and the captain grudgingly nodded approval in the observation room. For a moment, Easton felt the old pride return, but it faded when he checked his phone and saw no messages from Wyatt. Desperate, he drove to the shelter after shift, finding Wyatt organizing supplies in the back room. Their conversation started tense, but softened into the honesty they both needed. "I love you, Easton, but I can't keep being your secret," Wyatt said, tears threatening. "Either we face this together or I need to step back." Easton reached for him, the embrace fierce and wordless, and in that moment he made a silent vow to find a way forward. The following week tested that vow when Easton's parents called again, this time inviting him to a family reunion in the suburbs. Bring anyone special if you want, his mother added casually, but the subtext was clear. He agreed to go alone, and when he told Wyatt, the decision hung between them like smoke. The reunion was a minefield of aunts asking about girlfriends and cousins sharing wedding photos. Easton smiled through it all, but inside he was screaming. On the drive back, he stopped at a scenic overlook and called Wyatt, pouring out the loneliness until Wyatt's voice softened. Come home. We'll figure it out. The reconciliation that night was tender, filled with promises and the kind of lovemaking that reminded them why they fought so hard. But peace was short-lived. Monday brought news that a leaked internal memo about officer conduct concerns had circulated among the ranks, and fingers pointed at Easton without proof. Mike swore he hadn't said anything, yet the doubt lingered, straining their friendship further. Easton confronted a sergeant in the hallway, the exchange heated and public, leaving him written up for insubordination. Captain Harris called him in again, the warning clear: one more incident, and he would be reassigned to desk duty. That evening, Wyatt suggested they attend a small support group for LGBTQ officers and partners, a safe space downtown. Easton hesitated but agreed, and the meeting opened something inside him he hadn't known was closed. Listening to others share their stories of coming out on the job gave him courage, and on the way home, he held Wyatt's hand openly for the first time in public. The small act felt revolutionary. Yet back at the station the next day, the atmosphere had chilled further. A group of officers stopped talking when he entered the gym, and later someone left a printed Bible verse on his locker about unnatural relations. Easton tore it down, jaw tight, refusing to let them see the hurt. Wyatt listened that night, anger flashing in his eyes. This is harassment. Report it. But Easton knew reporting would only paint him as weaker, so he swallowed the rage and focused on the job. A new case landed on his desk, a series of hate crimes targeting gay men in the neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on him, and he worked the leads with a personal fire that impressed even the skeptics. Progress came slowly, but each interview revealed patterns that pointed toward an organized group. When he presented the findings to the team, a few nods of respect broke through the silence, a tiny crack in the wall. Mike pulled him aside afterward. You're onto something big here. Don't let them dim that light. The encouragement meant more than Easton expected, and that night he and Wyatt celebrated with a quiet dinner, planning their first real vacation once the case wrapped. Hope flickered brighter, but the coming days would test every ounce of it as secrets long buried began to surface and the line between personal and professional blurred beyond repair. The hate crimes case consumed Easton completely, late nights at the station turning into all-nighters fueled by coffee and determination. Wyatt supported from the sidelines, bringing meals and listening to theories, but the distance at work remained. Then the unthinkable happened. During a routine evidence review, Easton discovered a witness statement that mentioned a familiar name, one that connected the crimes to someone inside the department. The realization hit like a freight train. He sat in the dim records room, heart racing, piecing together how a colleague's brother had ties to the group responsible. Confronting the evidence meant risking everything, including the fragile peace he had built. He confided in Mike first, the conversation tense in the empty parking garage. This could blow up the whole precinct, Mike warned, but he agreed to help gather more proof discreetly. That night, Easton told Wyatt over dinner, watching his partner's face pale. You have to report it, Wyatt insisted, but Easton knew internal affairs would drag him through the mud too. The next morning, he found his locker vandalized again, this time with slurs scrawled in red marker. Captain Harris dismissed it as kids messing around, but the message was clear. Easton filed a formal complaint anyway, the paperwork feeling like a declaration of war. The department's response was swift and cold, a mandatory counseling session where the therapist probed his stress levels with thinly veiled questions about his orientation. Wyatt waited outside the building afterward, and their drive home was silent until Wyatt finally spoke. I'm proud of you for standing up, but I'm scared for us. Easton pulled over, taking Wyatt's hands. I won't lose you to this. The following week brought the turning point no one saw coming. During a stakeout on the hate crimes ring, Easton and Mike spotted the suspect entering a warehouse. Backup was minutes away, but the suspect spotted them and fled inside with hostages. Easton made the split-second decision to go in alone, using the negotiation skills the captain had once called weak. Hours of tense dialogue followed, the suspect ranting about betrayal and rejection, and Easton talked him down by sharing just enough of his own story to build trust. The hostages walked out unharmed, the suspect in cuffs, and the news vans arrived before Easton could process what he had done. Back at the station, the captain's praise was grudging but public. You handled that like a pro. Yet the real storm hit when the internal investigation into the leaked connections began. Easton's evidence pointed directly at a veteran sergeant whose brother was the ringleader. The revelation split the department, accusations flying, and suddenly Easton was labeled a whistleblower and a traitor in equal measure. Mike stood by him publicly, but the friendship strained under the pressure of interviews and side-eyes. Wyatt's support never wavered, but when a local news outlet picked up the story and hinted at Easton's personal life as motive, the secrecy they had guarded for years shattered. Easton's parents saw the report and called in a panic. "Is this true, son?" his father demanded, voice cracking. The conversation that followed was the hardest of Easton's life, tears and silence stretching across the phone line until his mother finally said, "We love you. Come home so we can talk." The acceptance was tentative but real, a crack of light in the darkness. At work, the backlash intensified. Captain Harris called an emergency meeting, the room thick with tension as he addressed the distractions plaguing the unit. Easton sat tall, refusing to shrink, and when the meeting ended, several officers approached him quietly with words of quiet respect. The tide was turning, but not without cost. That evening, Wyatt met him at their favorite bench by the lake, the city lights reflecting on the water like scattered stars. "You did it," Wyatt said, pulling him close. "You faced it all." But Easton knew the fight wasn't over. The next day, internal affairs cleared him of wrongdoing while suspending the implicated sergeant, yet the department remained divided. Friendships fractured permanently, and Easton found himself eating lunch alone more often than not. Wyatt suggested they make their relationship official in small ways, starting with a photo on social media that drew supportive comments and hateful ones in equal measure. Easton hit post with shaking fingers, the act liberating and terrifying. The following weeks brought healing and new challenges. Easton's parents visited, the reunion awkward but genuine, his father clapping him on the back with a gruff, "I'm proud of the man you've become." Mike reconciled fully during a late-night shift, admitting his own fears had clouded his judgment. "You're the strongest guy I know," he said, and the words meant everything. Yet the biggest test waited just around the corner, a moment that would force Easton to choose between the badge he loved and the life he refused to hide anymore. The call came in at 3:17 a.m., the kind that jolted every officer awake. Active shooter at a downtown community center hosting a youth pride event. Easton was already suited up when dispatch confirmed Wyatt was inside coordinating the shelter's participation. The world narrowed to a single terrifying point as he sped through red lights, sirens screaming. Captain Harris rode with him, the usual tension replaced by grim focus. "Your man's in there?" the captain asked quietly, and Easton nodded once, the admission hanging between them like a bridge finally crossed. They arrived to chaos, SWAT staging outside while panicked parents gathered behind barricades. Easton pushed through the command post, demanding a role, and when the negotiators' first attempts failed, he stepped forward. "I know these kids. Let me try." The captain hesitated only a second before nodding. Inside the center, the shooter, a young man twisted by the same rejection Easton had fought, held 12 hostages, including Wyatt. Easton entered alone, vest on, hands visible, voice steady as he began the longest conversation of his life. He shared pieces of his journey, the labeling, the hiding, the moment he chose truth over fear. The shooter listened, tears mixing with rage, and slowly lowered the weapon as Wyatt talked softly from the corner, reminding the young man he wasn't alone. The standoff ended without a single shot, hostages streaming out to safety, and Easton walked out last with the shooter in cuffs, Wyatt's hand brushing his in the chaos. The news helicopters captured it all, the footage going viral by sunrise. Back at the station, the atmosphere had transformed. Officers who had once whispered now clapped him on the back, Captain Harris offering a rare handshake. "You proved me wrong, Easton. That wasn't weakness. That was courage. The words landed like a long-awaited exoneration. Wyatt waited in the lobby, the embrace they shared in front of everyone a public declaration louder than any press conference. That night the city felt different, lighter, as they walked hand in hand through downtown, no more hiding. Easton's parents called again, this time with genuine pride, and Mike organized a small gathering at the bar where toasts were raised to the strongest cop in Chicago. Yet the emotional aftermath ran deep. Easton sat with Wyatt on their balcony the next evening, processing the terror and the triumph. "I almost lost you," he whispered, and Wyatt pulled him close. "But you saved everyone, including us." The weeks that followed brought promotions and speaking invitations, but more importantly, they brought peace. Easton testified at the shooter's hearing, advocating for mental health support instead of maximum punishment, his voice steady with the authority of lived experience. The department rolled out new training programs he helped design, and slowly the culture shifted. Friendships that had fractured mended stronger, and even the most skeptical officers began to see the value in empathy. Easton and Wyatt took that long-overdue weekend away, driving up the lakeshore with the windows down and music loud, the future stretching bright ahead. Back home, they began planning a small commitment ceremony. Nothing flashy, just close friends and family who had earned their place. The night before the event, Easton stood on the same fire escape where he had once doubted everything, looking out at the city that had tested him and ultimately embraced him. Wyatt joined him, arms wrapping around his waist. "Ready for the rest of our lives?" he asked, and Easton turned to kiss him under the Chicago stars. The ceremony was simple and perfect, vows spoken with the kind of certainty that only came from walking through fire together. Captain Harris attended, offering a genuine toast that brought the room to tears. Mike stood as best man, the friendship fully restored. Easton's parents hugged Wyatt like the son they had always wanted, the acceptance complete. As the evening wound down, Easton looked around the room at the faces that had once judged and now celebrated, and he realized the label weak had never defined him. It had only been the starting line of a journey that led to this moment of wholeness. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, a silent witness to the man who had refused to shrink and in doing so had changed more than his own life. Yet even in triumph, Easton knew the work wasn't finished. There would always be new challenges, new whispers, new kids needing the same courage he had found. But with Wyatt beside him and the badge still on his chest, he was ready for whatever came next. The story of the gay cop labeled weak had become the story of the hero who saved more than lives. He saved the truth of who he was. The months after the ceremony passed in a blur of new routines and deeper connections. Easton returned to the streets with a confidence that radiated, mentoring younger officers and speaking at academies about the strength found in authenticity. Wyatt expanded the shelter's programs, using their story to fundraise and advocate for better protections. Together, they became quiet symbols in the city, invited to panels and community events where their presence alone opened conversations long overdue. One crisp autumn morning, Easton received a call from Internal Affairs. The department was creating a new diversity liaison position, and his name topped the list. He accepted with the same quiet determination that had carried him through the darkest days. And on his first day in the role, he walked the halls with Wyatt at his side for the official photo. The image made the department newsletter, a visual promise of change. Mike became his right hand, the friendship evolving into a true partnership that strengthened the whole unit. Easton's parents visited often now, bringing homemade casseroles and stories of their own growth, the family table finally feeling complete. Evenings were for the two of them, quiet dinners turning into plans for a house with a yard where they could one day raise a family through adoption. The city itself seemed to breathe easier, small shifts rippling outward as more officers came out and policies evolved. Yet Easton never forgot the boy he had once been, the one who hid in shadows. He volunteered extra hours at the shelter, sitting with teens who reminded him of Tyler and of himself, sharing the simple truth that strength wasn't about being unbreakable, but about choosing to stand anyway. One night, a new arrival, a scared 17-year-old fresh from the streets, looked at Easton with the same doubt he had once carried. "Does it ever get better?" the kid asked. Easton smiled, the answer coming easy now. "It does. but you have to fight for it every day. Wyatt watched from the doorway, pride shining in his eyes, and later that night they lay awake talking about the long road that had led them here. The reflection brought tears and laughter in equal measure, the kind of catharsis that only came after surviving the storm. As winter approached, Easton stood on the same overlook where he had once pulled over in despair, this time with Wyatt's hand firmly in his. The city spread below them, lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth, and for the first time the future felt not just possible but certain. They had faced the labeling, the betrayal, the fear, and emerged not just intact but transformed. The badge on Easton's chest no longer felt like armor against himself, but a symbol of everything he had become. Wyatt leaned in, resting his head on Easton's shoulder. "We did it," he whispered, and the simple words held the weight of every sacrifice and every victory. The journey wasn't over, but the path ahead was theirs to walk openly, hand in hand, in a world they had helped make a little kinder. True or false? Hiding your true identity makes you stronger in the face of societal pressure?